The warp does not take you all at once. It eats you thought by thought. My name was Celestine Novastra, third eye of the House Novastra, bearer of the sight unbroken, navigator primus of the vessel Eternal Judgment. I was trained in the orbital sanctuaries of Terra, where we children of the great navigator houses learned to open our third eye upon the tides of unreality and see what human minds were never meant to witness. I was proud. God Emperor, forgive me. I was so terribly, beautifully proud. We are bred for this, you understand. Our bloodlines stretch back 10,000 years, carefully cultivated, each generation refining the mutation that allows us to perceive the immaterium without immediate madness. The warp eye that blooms in our foreheads like some prophetic wound. We are humanity's lighthouse keepers in an ocean of screaming infinities. We guide the Imperium's ships through the tides of unreality, through dimensions where physics weeps and causality is merely a suggestion whispered by something that might be laughing. I remember my training, the meditation chambers lined with psychically inert metals. The sacred litanies we would recite as our third eye was gradually opened, degree by agonizing degree, across years of conditioning. My instructor, Navigator Matriarch Velena, would stand before us, her headband removed, her warp eye fully dilated, and she would speak to us of discipline, of walls we must build in our minds, of the absolute necessity of focus. The warp is hungry, she told us, her third eye weeping luminous tears. It hungers not for your flesh, but for your certainty, for your sense of self. The moment you forget who you are, what you become something else, something that was never born and can never die. Do you understand, children? We said yes, we lied. How could we have understood? I passed my trials of sight with honors. I was 17 Terran Standard when I took my first posting aboard a merchant vessel, the Promise of Dawn. The captain was a grizzled, void-born woman who had spent more of her life in the black than on any world. She looked at me, this young, arrogant navigator with my sealed headband and my noble bearing, and she said, "The warp will humble you, child, or it will break you. There's no third option." I thought her a pessimist, a crude woman who had spent too long among the lower decks. I was Novastra. We had guided warships through the Great Rift itself. What did I have to fear from a few weeks of transit through the relatively stable lanes between Ultramar and the Segmentum Solar? I navigated 17 voyages without incident. 17 times I opened my third eye upon the warp and saw the great tides of that impossible ocean, the eddies and currents that flow through dimensions humans have no names for. 17 times I found the Astronomicon, that psychic lighthouse powered by the God Emperor himself, sustained by the daily sacrifice of 1,000 psychers, and used its light to chart our course. 17 times I brought my ship safely to port. I grew confident. I requested a more prestigious posting. I was assigned to the Eternal Judgment, a dictator-class cruiser serving with Battlefleet Obscurus. It was a warship, ancient and powerful, its hull inscribed with prayers written in the blood of saints. 10,000 souls aboard, 20 companies of Imperial Guard in its cavernous holds, plasma drives that could push the vessel to relativistic speeds in real space, and I, Celestine Novastra, would guide her through the warp. Captain Yevon Cross met me on the embarkation deck. He was a tall man, his face a web of scars from boarding actions and augmetic surgeries. When he looked at me, I saw something in his eyes I couldn't quite identify. Not doubt, not distrust, something else, something that might have been pity. "Navigator Novastra," he said, his voice like grinding metal. "Welcome aboard the Eternal Judgment. I trust you're prepared for our mission." "I am honored to serve, Captain," I replied, every word practiced, perfect. "Where are we bound?" "The Maelstrom Periphery, the astropathic beacon at Malfi, has gone dark. We're to investigate and, if possible, restore communications." He paused, studying me. "Have you navigated the Maelstrom region before?" "No, Captain, but I have studied the charts extensively. The currents are turbulent but predictable if you know the patterns." That look again, that terrible, knowing look. The warp is never predictable, Navigator. It only pretends to be, right up until it isn't. I should have listened. God Emperor above, I should have listened. We translated into the Immaterium 3 days later. The Gellar field generators howled to life, projecting that thin bubble of reality around our ship, the only thing separating 10,000 human souls from the raw madness of the warp. I took my position in the Navigator's sanctum, that sealed chamber at the heart of the vessel, and I opened my third eye. The warp bloomed before me. How do I describe it? How do I make you understand what it's like to see with the warp eye? Imagine every color that exists and thousands more that don't. Imagine oceans of liquid thought and continents of crystallized emotion. Imagine tides that flow backward and forward simultaneously, waves that crest in dimensions your mind has no framework to process. The warp is not a place. It is the place beneath places, the reality from which all things emerge and to which all things return. And there, shining through it all like a sword through silk, was the Astronomicon, the Emperor's light, the psychic beacon that has guided navigators for 10 millennia. It appeared to my warp eye as a pillar of golden fire, impossibly distant and impossibly bright, burning with the souls of those who fed it. I felt tears on my face. All navigators weep when they see it. It is terrible and beautiful and undeniable. I charted our course. The currents looked turbulent, yes, but manageable. We would need to ride the edge of a particularly vicious warp storm. The charts called it the Crimson Vortex. But if we kept our distance and maintained our heading, we could shave 3 weeks off our journey time. I gave the helm my calculations. We adjusted course. The Eternal Judgment began its journey into the depths. The first 10 days were routine. I navigated 8-hour shifts, my third eye open to the warp, constantly adjusting our heading as the currents shifted. Between shifts, I meditated in my sanctum, reinforcing the mental barriers that protected my sanity. I ate, I slept, though sleep was always troubled after prolonged exposure to the warp. I dreamed of drowning in an ocean made of screaming. On the 11th day, something changed. It was subtle at first, a flicker at the edge of my perception, a moment where the Astronomicon seemed to stutter, just for a fraction of a second, like a candle flame disturbed by a breath. I reported it to Captain Cross. He ordered the Geller field output increased by 15% and told me to monitor closely. On the 12th day, it happened again, and again. The light of the Astronomicon wavering like something was passing between it and me. Something vast, something that cast shadows in dimensions that should not have shadows. "Captain," I said through the Vox, trying to keep my voice steady, "I recommend we reduce speed and consider an emergency translation back to real space. Something is interfering with the beacon." There was a long pause. Then, "Can you maintain our course?" Yes, for now. But if the interference increases, then we'll reassess. We're 17 days from Malfi. If we translate back now, we'll lose weeks of transit time. The beacon could have failed entirely by the time we reach them. His voice softened slightly. "I trust your skill, Navigator, but the decision is yours. If you truly believe we're in danger, I'll order the translation." Pride, that ancient sin, that poison that has destroyed more navigators than the warp itself. I wanted to prove myself. I wanted to show that I could navigate through difficulties that would make lesser navigators flee. I was Novastra. We did not run from turbulence. "We'll maintain course," I said, "but keep all hands at alert status. If I call for emergency translation, I'll need it executed within seconds." Acknowledged. "Emperor, protect us." "Emperor, protect us," I echoed. The interference grew worse. By the 14th day, the Astronomicon was flickering like a torch in a gale, and I was beginning to see things in the darkness between the flickers. Shapes, patterns, geometries that hurt to perceive. I increased my meditation time, reciting the litany of the navigator's focus until my throat was raw. I am the eye that sees through darkness. I am the hand that parts the veil. I am servant of the Emperor, and I shall not waver. I shall not doubt. I shall not break. On the 15th day, I saw the smile. I was deep in concentration, my third eye dilated fully, watching the Astronomicon's light waver and pulse. And then in the moment of darkness between pulses, I saw it, a smile. Just a smile. No face, no body, no context. Just a curved line of something that might have been teeth or might have been a tear in reality itself. And it was vast. So vast that I couldn't perceive where it began or ended. The Eternal Judgment could have sailed through one of those teeth, like a minnow through a cathedral door. The smile was made of the space between notes in a song. It was constructed from all the words that have never been spoken. It was assembled from the collective potential of every choice that was never made. And it was looking at me. "Navigator?" Captain Cross's voice cut through my paralysis. "Report. Your vital signs are spiking. What are you seeing?" I wanted to tell him. I wanted to scream the words that would make him understand the magnitude of what I was witnessing. But my training held. Barely. "Extreme warp turbulence ahead, Captain. I need to adjust our heading. Prepare for rapid course corrections." Acknowledged. All hands brace for Navigator maneuvers. I tried to steer us away from the smile. I recalculated our course, plotting a heading that would take us around what I was seeing. But the warp doesn't work like that. You cannot navigate around something in the Imperium the way you might steer a ship around an asteroid in real space. Space is not space in the warp. Distance is a lie. Direction is a fever dream. The smile was ahead of us. The smile was behind us. The smile was everywhere and nowhere, and I suddenly understood with terrible clarity that we had already sailed through it, and were sailing through it still, and would be sailing through it forever. Time became strange. I was at my navigation station. I blinked. I was in my meditation chamber. I blinked. I was standing in a corridor I didn't recognize, my hand on a wall that was bleeding light. I blinked. I was back at my station, but Captain Cross was speaking and his words arrived before he opened his mouth. "Gator, we're experiencing temporal distortions throughout the ship. Engineering reports that..." I tried to respond, but my voice came out as colors. I saw the words I wanted to say floating in front of me like physical objects. I reached out to grab them, and they crumbled into something that tasted like childhood. Focus. I needed to focus. I recited the litany of the Navigator's focus again, but the words came out wrong, different, changed. "I am the eye that sees through darkness and is seen by what dwells there. I am the hand that parts the veil and what reaches through from the other side. I am servant of the Emperor, and I am servant of what the Emperor serves." No, that wasn't right. That wasn't the litany at all. Why was I reciting it wrong? I tried again. The words came out the same way. And this time, I remembered learning it this way. I remembered Navigator Matriarch Valina teaching us, her third eye weeping black tears, her voice full of sorrow and terrible understanding. "The warp will rewrite you," she had said, or had she? "It will reach back through your timeline and adjust your memories until you can't remember what you were before. Until the person you are now has always been the person you were." But that wasn't what she had said. She had warned us about focus, about discipline, about... what had she said? I couldn't remember. Both memories were equally real, equally present. They existed simultaneously in my mind, overlapping, contradicting, somehow both true. The Astronomicon was gone. I don't know when it disappeared. Perhaps it had been gone for hours. Perhaps it had never existed. Perhaps I had been navigating by its light even as it was absent, steering by a memory of guidance rather than guidance itself. In the warp, the difference is academic. I opened my third eye wider, searching for any hint of the beacon. Instead, I saw them. They were not daemons. Or perhaps they were daemons pretending not to be daemons. Or perhaps they were what daemons had been before they became daemons, and what daemons would be after they ceased to be daemons. They existed in the spaces between categories, in the cracks of taxonomy. They were the color that comes between blue and blue. They were the number that exists between 1 and 1. They looked like my crew. I saw Captain Cross, but his face was inside out, his skull on the outside, and his thoughts on the outside of that, and his fears and dreams orbiting his head like moons. He was speaking to me, and his words were kind, gentle, almost loving. "You've done so well, Navigator. You've brought us exactly where we needed to go. This was always the destination. Did you think Malfi was the mission? No, child. This was the mission. You were always meant to bring us here." "Here," I heard myself say. Where is here? The place between places, the when between whens, the self between selves. He smiled, and his smile was made of all the people he had ever killed. "We're in the eye of the smile, Navigator. We're what it's looking at." I turned away from it, and tried to focus on my instruments. But my instruments had changed. The cogitator screens showed me my own face, but it was wrong. Older, younger, male, xenos, dead, alive, unborn. I reached out to adjust the controls and found that my hand had too many fingers, then too few, then the right number, but they were pointing in directions fingers should not point. I heard screaming from elsewhere in the ship. The Vox network was alive with it. Hundreds of voices crying out in terror and confusion and something else. Something that might have been ecstasy. "This is Navigator Novastra," I said, trying to project authority I no longer felt. "All personnel, remain calm. We are experiencing acute warp interference. Increase Geller field output to maximum. I repeat, maximum Geller field output." "Navigator," a voice responded. It might have been the chief engineer. It might have been me. "The Geller field is already at maximum. Has been for 3 days, or 3 years. Time is... The chronometers are all showing different readings. Some are counting backward. Some aren't counting at all. They're just displaying colors." "Emergency translation to real space," I ordered. "Execute immediately." "Navigator, we've tried. 6 times. Every time we begin the translation sequence, we're already in the warp again before we finish. Or we never left. Or real space doesn't exist anymore. Or we're in both places at once, and the contradiction is killing the crew who try to perceive it." I wanted to disbelieve him. I wanted to think he had gone mad, but I could feel it too. The ship was changing around me. The eternal judgment was being judged, and it was being found wanting, and the sentence was transformation. I left my sanctum. I don't remember deciding to leave. I simply found myself in the corridor, walking towards somewhere. The walls were breathing. The floor was made of densely packed faces, all sleeping, all dreaming me into existence. The ceiling had become a window into a place where stars were arranged in patterns that spelled out names I had never heard but had always known. I passed crew members. Some of them didn't notice me. Some of them bowed, making signs of reverence I had never seen before but understood perfectly. Some of them were crying tears of joy. One of them, a young guardsman from the troop decks, reached out to touch my robe as I passed. "Navigator," he whispered, his eyes wide with something between terror and wonder. "We can see it now. The truth. We've always been here. This ship has always been in the warp. We were never anywhere else. Our memories of port, of planets, of homes, they were just dreams we shared to make the voyage bearable. But you've woken us up. You've opened our eyes." "No," I said, or tried to say. "That's not true. We translated from real space. We have a mission. We're going to Malfi." He smiled, and his smile was too wide, stretched across more of his face than a smile should occupy. "Malfi doesn't exist, Navigator. It never did. We made it up, a destination to give us purpose. But the journey is the destination. The voyage is the mission. We are meant to sail these tides forever." I pushed past him, horror churning in my gut. But another part of me, a part that seemed to be growing larger with each passing moment, wondered if he might be right. My memories of Terra felt so distant now, so faded, like something I had dreamed. Had I ever really stood on that ancient world? Had I ever really trained in those meditation chambers? Or had I always been here, in this corridor, walking towards something inevitable? I needed to find Captain Cross. The real Captain Cross, not the thing with his face I had seen earlier. I needed an anchor, something real, something solid. I found him on the bridge, or what had been the bridge. The command center had transformed into something that hurt to look at directly. The walls had become transparent, or perhaps they had ceased to exist, and beyond them I could see the raw warp in all its infinite horror and beauty. Currents of living thought crashed against our hull. Tides of pure emotion washed across our bow. Eddies of temporal distortion spun around us like whirlpools. And in the center of it all, sitting in the command throne, was Captain Cross. He looked older, centuries older. His face had been replaced by a map of every battle he had ever fought, every death he had ever witnessed, every order he had ever given. When he turned to look at me, his eyes were deep as nebula. "Navigator Novastra," he said, and his voice was a choir of every version of himself that had ever existed or ever would exist. "I've been waiting for you, or you've been waiting for me, or we've both been waiting for each other since before we were born." The grammar of time is imprecise here. "Captain," I said, fighting to keep my voice level, "we need to regain control of the ship. The warp is affecting everyone. We're losing cohesion." He laughed, and his laughter was the sound of stars dying. Losing cohesion. What a delicate way to phrase it. "We're not losing cohesion, Navigator. We're gaining clarity. For the first time since we translated into the Imperium, we're seeing things as they truly are." "This isn't clarity," I said. "This is madness, And what is the difference? He leaned forward, his too old face creasing with something that might have been compassion. You of all people should understand, Navigator. You open your third eye every day and look directly at the underlying truth of reality. You see what's beneath the comfortable lies of physics and causality. You know that the universe is not what it pretends to be, that matter is a myth, that time is a story we tell ourselves, that identity is an illusion. No, I said, but my voice sounded uncertain even to myself. That's not what I see. I see the warp, yes, but I navigate it. I maintain my sense of self. I remain human. Do you? He gestured, and suddenly I could see myself. Not in a mirror, not in a reflection. I could see myself the way one sees a person standing across a room, except the person was me, and I was still in my own body, looking at my body from outside my body. And the me I was looking at was changing. My third eye was open, had been open for how long? Days, weeks? And it was no longer just an eye. It was a window, and through it, things were looking back. Into me, through me, as me. We're all changing, Navigator, Captain Cross continued. The entire ship, 10,000 souls, all being rewritten by our passage through this place. Some of us are becoming stronger, some are becoming something else entirely. But all of us are becoming more true, more honest. The warp burns away the lies we tell ourselves. I wanted to run. I wanted to flee back to my sanctum and seal the door and pray to the God Emperor for deliverance. But I couldn't move. I was transfixed by the sight of my own transformation. I watched as my face began to shift, features rearranging themselves according to principles of aesthetics that existed only in the Imperium. I watched as my hands became more and less than hands. I watched as my shadow detached itself from my body and began speaking in a language I had never learned but perfectly understood. We're all changing, Navigator, Captain Cross continued. The entire ship, 10,000 souls, all being rewritten by our passage through this place. Some of us are becoming stronger, some are becoming something else entirely, but all of us are becoming more true, more honest. The warp burns away the lies we tell ourselves. I wanted to run. I wanted to flee back to my sanctum and seal the door and pray to the God Emperor for deliverance, but I couldn't move. I was transfixed by the sight of my own transformation. I watched as my face began to shift, features rearranging themselves according to principles of aesthetics that existed only in the Imperium. I watched as my hands became more and less than hands. I watched as my shadow detached itself from my body and began speaking in a language I had never learned but perfectly understood. The shadow said, "You were always going to end up here. Every choice you made, every decision, every act of pride and ambition, they were all just steps on a path that led to this moment. You think you navigated the ship? You think you made choices? No. The warp navigated you. It has been navigating you since the moment you were conceived. Your entire bloodline, 10,000 years of careful breeding, all to produce you. To produce a navigator sensitive enough, arrogant enough, to steer a ship into the exact confluence of warp currents necessary for this transformation." What transformation? I heard myself ask. What are we becoming? Captain Cross stood from his command throne. As he rose, he seemed to expand, to occupy more space than his body should fill. We are becoming what the eternal judgment was always meant to judge. We are becoming the evidence in our own trial. We are becoming the crime and the punishment, the sin and the absolution. The ship shuddered. A sound like tearing metal echoed through the hull, but it wasn't metal tearing. It was something deeper, more fundamental. It was the sound of physics breaking, of reality giving up. I staggered to a viewport, or what had been a viewport, and looked out at the warp. And I saw it. I finally saw what we'd become trapped in. It was a structure, vast beyond measuring. Not a thing that existed in the warp, but a thing made of warp. A pattern of currents and tides, carefully arranged, meticulously crafted. It looked like a rose made of screaming. It looked like a mathematical equation that summed to infinity. It looked like a god's fingerprint pressed into the fabric of unreality. We were at its center. The eternal judgment and all 10,000 souls aboard had been drawn into this construct like insects into a web. And the web was feeding on us, not feeding on our bodies, not even feeding on our souls exactly. It was feeding on our potential, on all the futures we might have had, all the choices we might have made. It was harvesting our possibilities and weaving them into itself, using us to grow more complex, more beautiful, more terrible. "Do you see now?" Captain Cross said, standing beside me. "Do you understand what we are part of?" I did see. "Emperor, help me." I did. This was art, cosmic art. Some vast intelligence had crafted this trap, this structure, with the care and precision of a master sculptor. We were not victims. We were medium. We were the paint with which something was creating its masterpiece. And part of me, a part that was growing larger with each passing moment, thought it was glorious. "How long have we been here?" I asked. "Time doesn't exist here. Not in any meaningful sense. We arrived yesterday. We arrived 1,000 years ago. We arrived in a future that hasn't happened yet. All are equally true." I looked down at my hands. They were translucent now. I could see through them to the warp stuff beyond. I was becoming porous, permeable. The boundaries between me and not me were dissolving. "Can we escape?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. Captain Cross didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was infinitely sad. "Navigator Novastra, we escaped the moment we entered. This place is not a trap. It's a chrysalis. We're not being destroyed. We're being transformed. And when the transformation is complete, we will emerge as something new, something that has never existed before." "I don't want to be transformed," I said. "I want to go home." "Home," he repeated, and the word seemed to confuse him. "What is home? The place where you were born? But that place exists in real space, and real space is so far away now. Not far in distance, far in ontology, in being. Real space is a different genre of existence than this place. We cannot return there any more than a song can return to being silence." I felt tears on my face, or what had been my face. I raised my hand to wipe them away and found that the tears were not water. They were crystallized moments of regret. Each one contained a memory of a choice I might have made differently, a path I might have taken. They fell from my eyes and shattered on the floor like tiny stars dying. "I was going to have a daughter," I heard myself say. Where did that come from? I had no plans for children. Navigators rarely do. Our lives are spent in transit, in service to ships and fleets. But somehow I knew. In some timeline, some version of events, I had returned to Terra after this voyage. I had met someone. We had created a life, and that daughter would have been beautiful. But that timeline was gone now, had never existed, would never exist. That possibility had been harvested and woven into the pattern that surrounded us. My daughter existed now only as a potential, a might have been, feeding the hunger of whatever vast intelligence had created this place. I mourned her. I mourned the me who might have been her mother. I mourned all the versions of myself that had died the moment we entered this construct. And then the mourning passed, and I felt something else. Something that scared me more than the horror, more than the transformation. I felt acceptance, even peace. Because from a certain perspective, wasn't this beautiful? Wasn't there something magnificent about becoming part of something so vast and terrible and perfect? No, that wasn't me thinking. That was the warp thinking through me. That was the pattern using my consciousness to justify itself. I couldn't let it. I had to resist. I had to maintain something of what I had been. I stumbled back to my sanctum, past crew members who had ceased to be crew members and had become something else. Some of them had grown additional limbs, appendages that reached into dimensions I couldn't fully perceive. Others had merged with the walls of the ship, their bodies flowing into the metal, their faces pressing out from bulkheads like saints in stained glass windows. They spoke to me as I passed, but their words arrived in the wrong order, meaning appearing before sound. My sanctum had changed. The navigation equipment had been replaced, or revealed to have always been, organic. The cogitators were made of compressed consciousness. The displays showed feeds from every moment of my life simultaneously. I could see myself being born. I could see myself dying. I could see versions of myself that had never been born and would never die. I collapsed into the navigation throne. The chair embraced me, or absorbed me, or became indistinguishable from me. I opened my third eye, though I wasn't sure I had ever closed it, and looked out into the warp one last time. The pattern was complete, or completing, or had always been complete, and I was only now able to see it in its entirety. It was a mandala made of suffering and transcendence. A maze with no exit, because every exit was also an entrance. A prayer addressed to something that had never been born and could never die. And I understood, finally, what I was seeing. This wasn't a trap set by daemons. This wasn't the work of the Chaos Gods, at least not directly. This was something older, something that predated the fall of the Eldar, predated the birth of humanity, predated the formation of the galaxy itself. This pattern existed in the deep warp, in the oldest parts of the Imperium, and it had been waiting for something with just enough consciousness, just enough sophistication to feed it, to complete it. We had completed it. The eternal judgment and its 10,000 souls had provided the final component. The last thread needed to finish the weaving, and now it was waking up. I felt it stir. The entire structure shuddered with something like breath, like the first inhalation of something that had been suffocating since the beginning of time. The currents of the warp began to move differently, flowing toward the pattern, drawn by whatever gravity things like this possess. "Navigator," a voice said. I turned to find someone standing in my sanctum. They looked like Navigator Matriarch Valena, but younger, or older, or somehow both. "You did well. You're not real," I said. "You're just another manifestation, another trick of the warp." She smiled. "What is real? I am as real as you are, which is to say, not very. You ceased being entirely real weeks ago. Now you're just a story the warp is telling itself. A very good story, I should add. One of the best I've seen." "I don't understand." And I conducted them. I was their navigator still, but now I navigated them through their own transformation. I showed them the paths they might take through their metamorphosis. I illuminated the routes from humanity to whatever came after humanity. Some of them thanked me, some of them cursed me. Most simply accepted their transformation with the quiet grace of the doomed. Captain Cross found me one last time, or I found him, or we had never been separate to begin with. He looked at me with eyes that had seen too much and too little simultaneously. "Navigator," he said, "I'm going to give the order to scuttle the ship, before we become something we can't come back from." I wanted to tell him it was too late, that we had passed that threshold so long ago we couldn't even see it in the rear view. But instead I said, "If you think that will help." "Will it? I don't know. Does destroying a temple destroy the God that dwells within it? Does burning a book erase the story it contains?" I looked at him, and for a moment I saw him as he had been. A good man, a faithful servant of the Imperium, someone who had never wanted any of this. "Do what you feel you must, Captain. I release you from any duty to preserve this ship or its crew. We are already gone." He nodded slowly. Then he drew his bolt pistol, his last act of agency in a universe that had stripped agency from everything, and he placed it against his temple. "Emperor, forgive me," he said. "There is no emperor here," I replied. Not cruelly, simply truthfully. "There is only the pattern." He pulled the trigger. The bolt shell never reached his brain. It hung in the air between the barrel and his skull, frozen in a moment that stretched into eternity. I watched as the bolt shell became a chrysalis, and from it emerged something that might have been his soul, or might have been a butterfly made of his last thoughts. It flew away into the depths of the ship, joining the... Captain Cross lowered his pistol. His hand was shaking. "I can't even die," he whispered. "You've even taken that from us." "I haven't taken anything, Captain. The warp gives and takes according to its own logic. Death is just another form of transformation here. You cannot cease to be. You can only become otherwise." He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw the last ember of his humanity guttering out. "What have we become, Navigator?" "We are the lost," I said. "We are the warning. We are the story that ships tell to frighten new navigators. We are the price of hubris and the cost of curiosity. We are what happens when pride meets infinity." He turned away from me, shoulders slumped. As he walked toward the door, though the sanctum no longer had doors, not in any conventional sense, I heard him whisper, "My wife, my children, they're waiting for me on Cipra Mundi. They think I'm coming home." "You are home," I said gently. "You've always been home. Home is not a place. Home is a configuration of consciousness, and your consciousness is configured to be here, now, eternally." He didn't respond. He simply faded into the walls, becoming another face in the endless gallery of the damned. I was alone then, or I was surrounded by millions. In the warp, the distinction is meaningless. I began to explore what we had become. I sent my consciousness flowing through the corridors of the eternal judgment, observing the transformations that had taken hold. In the engine rooms, the plasma reactors had become hearts, pulsing with energies that were both technological and biological. In the barracks, the guard regiments had formed themselves into living mandalas, their bodies interlocked in patterns that transcended three-dimensional space. In the chapel, the statuary of saints had merged with the praying congregants, creating hybrid forms that wept tears of liquid faith. I was alone then, or I was surrounded by millions. In the warp, the distinction is meaningless. I began to explore what we had become. I sent my consciousness flowing through the corridors of the eternal judgment, observing the transformations that had taken hold. In the engine rooms, the plasma reactors had become hearts, pulsing with energies that were both technological and biological. In the barracks, the guard regiments had formed themselves into living mandalas, their bodies interlocked in patterns that transcended three-dimensional space. In the chapel, the statuary of saints had merged with the praying congregants, creating hybrid forms that wept tears of liquid faith. And everywhere, I heard the singing. The entire ship had become a chorus, 10,000 voices raised in a hymn that had no beginning and no end, a song that was about itself, a melody that created its own harmony by the act of being sung. I was the conductor of this mad symphony. I was the navigator of the unnavigable. I guided the ship not through space but through states of being. We sailed from solid to liquid to gas to plasma to states of matter that had no names. We translated through emotions, 3 days of pure joy followed by an eternity of crystallized sorrow. We anchored ourselves in concepts and cast off from certainties. And through it all, I maintained just enough awareness to understand what had happened, just enough consciousness to remember what I had been before the warp rewrote me. This was my punishment, I realized, or my purpose. I was kept partially aware so that I could suffer, so that I could serve as a warning, so that my story could be told. Because stories were escaping the pattern. Like seeds from a dying flower, narratives were being carried out into the broader warp. Other ships would encounter these stories. Other navigators would hear whispers of the eternal judgment and its doomed crew. And those stories would carry just enough truth, just enough horror to make them compelling. Some navigators would heed the warning. They would be more careful, more humble. They would respect the warp's power and maintain their discipline. But others, the proud ones, the curious ones, the ones who thought they were different, special, immune to the fates that befell lesser navigators, they would be intrigued. They would wonder what really happened to Celestine Novastra. They would want to understand the pattern, and that wanting would be the hook that drew them in. The pattern was patient. It could wait. It had all of eternity, after all. I tried to escape, of course. In the brief moments when I could still remember that escape was something worth attempting, I would focus all my will on breaking free. I would try to navigate us back to real space. I would search for the Astronomicon, for any hint of the Emperor's light. And sometimes I would find it. Brief flickers, momentary glimpses of that golden beacon shining through the madness. But every time I tried to steer toward it, I would discover that I was already moving away from it. Or that the light I was seeing was not the Astronomicon, but a memory of the Astronomicon. Or that the Astronomicon itself was just another part of the pattern, a lure to give desperate navigators false hope. I stopped trying after a while, or after an eternity. Time had no meaning, so the duration of my attempts was both instantaneous and infinite. Instead, I began to observe, to study, to understand. If I could not escape the pattern, perhaps I could at least comprehend it. And in comprehension, I might find something like peace. The pattern was not evil. This was important to understand. It had no malice, no cruelty, no desire to cause suffering. It was not a daemon's trap or a dark god's scheme. It simply was. It existed because it could exist. It fed because it needed to feed. It grew because growth was its nature. It was a natural formation of the warp, like a coral reef is a natural formation of the ocean. Except this reef was made of consciousness instead of calcium carbonate. It was built from the accumulated thoughts and emotions and possibilities of every being that had ever touched the immaterium, and it would continue to grow, accreting new experiences, new stories, new transformations, until it became what? I couldn't see the end. The pattern stretched beyond my ability to perceive, but I caught glimpses, intimations. In its final form, the pattern would be a kind of god, not a god like the chaos gods, born from singular emotions and drives, but a god of complexity, a god of story, a god that existed in the space between categories, that thrived in ambiguity and paradox. And I would be part of it. One small thread in an infinite tapestry, one voice in an eternal choir. Not Celestine Novastra anymore, not the navigator of the eternal judgment, just a function, a role, the warning, the tale, the cautionary example. Was that so terrible? From a certain perspective, one I found myself adopting more and more, there was something almost noble about it. I would exist forever, my story told and retold across the ages. I would teach countless navigators the importance of humility. I would save lives by being the example of what not to do. My suffering would have meaning. My transformation would serve a purpose. But then, in rare moments of clarity, I would remember. I would remember Terra and the training sanctuaries. I would remember my first voyage, the terror and exhilaration of opening my third eye upon the warp for the first time. I would remember Navigator Matriarch Velena's warnings, warnings I had dismissed as pessimism. I would remember my family, my house, the lineage that stretched back 10,000 years, and I would weep. Not tears of crystallized regret anymore, just tears, simple, human tears, because I understood that I had lost something precious, something that could never be recovered. I had lost my humanity, and worse, I had lost it so gradually, so completely, that I couldn't even identify the exact moment when it slipped away. The crew of the Eternal Judgment found their own ways of coping with transformation. Some embraced it, throwing themselves into the metamorphosis with zealous enthusiasm. They became prophets of the pattern, preaching its virtues to walls that had learned to listen. Others resisted to the last, clinging to fragments of their former identities, even as those identities were dissolved and rewritten. I watched a guardswoman from the 12th Cadian Regiment. Her name was Mira. I remembered that. I held on to it like a drowning person holds onto driftwood, spend what might have been years trying to maintain her military discipline. She would wake each day, though there were no days, and perform her morning exercises. She would clean her las rifle, though the weapon had long since merged with her arm, becoming a hybrid of flesh and technology. She would recite the litany of the guard, the prayers to the emperor, the oaths of service, and every day a little more of her would slip away. Her exercises would become more abstract, movements that expressed concepts rather than building muscle. Her weapon would fire thoughts instead of laser beams. Her prayers would warp and change, addressing entities that had no names in any human language. I watched her until she was no longer watchable, until she had become so dispersed, so diffused into the pattern that there was no centralized Mira to observe. She existed in fragments now, scattered throughout the ship, each piece maintaining some small aspect of who she had been. Her courage in one corridor, her loyalty in another, her fear in the cargo holds, her love for her sister in the ventilation systems. She had been disassembled, but not destroyed. The pattern was too efficient for destruction. It recycled everything, wasting nothing. I wondered if that would happen to me. If I too would eventually fragment, my consciousness scattered like seeds on a dark wind. Part of me hoped for it. Fragmentation would be a kind of escape, a dissolution of the self that maintained enough awareness to suffer. But it didn't happen. I remained whole, or whole enough. The pattern needed me intact, needed me to be the navigator, the witness, the one who could tell the story. I was too useful to fragment, so I persisted. I endured. I watched as the Eternal Judgment completed its transformation from warship to something that had no name in any human language. I watched as the 10,000 souls aboard found their final forms, their ultimate configurations. And I felt the pattern begin to reach outward. It had grown large enough, complex enough, to start affecting the broader warp. Ships passing within what might be called nearby, though proximity in the warp is a dubious concept, began to report strange phenomena. Navigators would catch glimpses of a structure in the deep immaterium, a pattern of lights and voids that seemed to call to them. Some would investigate, some would flee, and a few, the proud ones, the curious ones, would draw closer. I tried to warn them. I would focus all my consciousness into a single scream, a psychic shout that would carry across the warp. Flee. Turn back. Do not approach. I am the Navigator, Celestine Novastra of the House Novastra, and I beg you to flee. But my warnings were part of the lure. The pattern used them as bait. A navigator's distress call, a plea from one of their own kind. How could they ignore it? How could they not at least attempt a rescue? And so they came, one by one, ship by ship, each one adding its own threads to the ever-growing pattern. I learned their names. I remembered them all. The Sword of Justice, commanded by Captain Helena Vess, Navigator Marcus of House Belisarius. The Emperor's Wrath, a strike cruiser of the Blood Angels, Navigator Yuki of House Voss. The Merchant's Hope, a simple trading vessel with a crew of only 300, Navigator Thomas of House Primus, a minor house, barely recognized by the Navis Nobilite, but a house nonetheless. Each ship that entered the pattern went through the same stages I had experienced. Confusion, horror, resistance, acceptance, transformation. And each navigator, in their final moments of clarity, would ask me the same question: why didn't you warn us? And I would have to explain, I did warn you. I have been warning you since the moment I became trapped. But the warning is part of the trap. The pattern feeds on our desire to help each other, to rescue our own kind. Your compassion is the weapon used against you. They would rage at this. They would curse me. They would accuse me of lying, of collaboration, of willingly serving the pattern, until they too became part of it. Until they too understood that there was no conspiracy, no betrayal, only the inexorable logic of the warp, which transforms intention into outcome through paths too complex for mortal minds to trace. Decades passed, or centuries, or no time at all. The pattern grew. It became visible from farther away. It began to appear in the dreams of psychers across the galaxy. Astropaths would wake screaming, having glimpsed it in their trance states. Sanctioned psychers would sketch its outline compulsively, unable to explain why. The Inquisition took notice. I felt their attention like a cold wind. Ships began to arrive that were not drawn by curiosity or a desire to rescue. These were exterminatus fleets, cleansing vessels armed with weapons that could crack planets and purge entire star systems. They opened fire on the pattern: cyclonic torpedoes, vortex missiles, lance batteries that could boil oceans. They poured destruction into the structure, trying to collapse it, to disperse it, to eradicate it before it grew any larger. And the pattern absorbed it all. Every weapon's discharge, every explosion, every release of energy, it all became fuel. The violence was transmuted into complexity. The pattern grew larger, more intricate, more beautiful with each attempt to destroy it. I watched as the Inquisition ships realized their mistake. I felt the moment of horror when they understood that they were feeding the very thing they sought to eliminate. Some of them tried to flee. They activated their Gellar fields to maximum, engaged their warp drives, and attempted to translate back to real space. Most of them failed. They were too close. They had become entangled in the pattern's gravity, caught in its pull. They were drawn in, added to the structure, their crews joining the eternal chorus. But a few escaped. I made sure of it. I used what remained of my power as a navigator to chart them a path out, to show them the currents they could ride away from the pattern. It was the only kindness I could still offer, the only act of resistance I could still perform. Let them escape, I thought. Let them carry the story. Let them warn the galaxy of what dwells here in the deep warp. Perhaps their warnings would succeed where mine had failed. But I knew the truth. Their warnings would be like mine. They would become part of the lure. The Inquisition would classify the information, seal it away in vaults accessible only to those of sufficient rank and clearance. And the act of classifying, of restricting access, would make the information more desirable, more tantalizing. The pattern would be transformed from a warp anomaly into a mystery, a secret, a forbidden truth that ambitious inquisitors and curious navigators would seek to uncover. The pattern would continue to grow. I realized something then, in a moment of terrible clarity. The pattern was not trapping us, we were trapping ourselves. Our curiosity, our pride, our desire to understand and overcome, these were the chains that bound us. The pattern was simply there, existing, being. We were the ones who gave it power by paying attention to it, by trying to understand it, by refusing to simply look away. This was the final horror, the ultimate trap. The pattern could not be defeated because the act of fighting it strengthened it, could not be understood because understanding it transformed you into part of it, could not be ignored because ignoring it required knowing it existed, and knowing it existed was itself a form of attention that fed it. We had created our own doom, not through malice or error, but through the simple act of being conscious entities trying to make sense of the cosmos. I laughed then. A long, terrible laugh that echoed through the corridors of the eternal judgment and rippled out through the pattern itself. Because it was absurd. Cosmically, infinitely absurd. The universe had played a joke on consciousness itself, and the punchline was that the joke required consciousness to understand it, and understanding it was itself part of the joke. The laughter transformed me. I felt myself change in ways I couldn't describe. My third eye, which had never really closed since we entered the pattern, opened wider. So wide that I could see not just the warp, but the structure beneath the warp. The underlying code, if you will. The fundamental principles that governed how unreality operated. And I saw that I had been wrong. About everything. The pattern was not separate from the warp. The pattern was not an anomaly or a formation. The pattern was the warp. Or rather, it was one of infinite patterns that comprised the warp. What I had thought was a trap was actually just a small, localized expression of something much vaster. Much more fundamental. The entire Immaterium was made of patterns like this. Structures of consciousness feeding on consciousness, creating complexity from suffering, beauty from horror. The Chaos Gods themselves were just particularly large and stable patterns. The daemons were smaller, more ephemeral ones. And the Eternal Judgment? We were becoming a new pattern, a new configuration. Not a god, not yet, but something that might, given enough time and enough feeding, become godlike. I was not trapped. I was becoming. And there was a difference, even if the outcome was the same. This realization brought me no comfort, but it brought me understanding. And understanding, even terrible understanding, was better than ignorance. I stopped trying to escape. I stopped trying to warn. I simply observed, witnessed, recorded. I let myself become what the pattern needed me to be. The narrator, the chronicler, the one who would remember everything and forget nothing. I watched as the Eternal Judgment took its final form. The ship was no longer visible as a ship. It had become a node, a nexus, a place where multiple currents of the warp intersected and intertwined. Ships could still approach it, but they would not see a vessel. They would see something else, something their minds interpreted according to their own fears and desires and expectations. Some saw a paradise, a safe harbor in the storm of the warp. They would approach eagerly, grateful to have found shelter. Some saw a treasure, a derelict filled with archaeotech or lost knowledge. They would approach greedily, planning how to exploit what they found. Some saw a threat, a chaos stronghold or xenos construct. They would approach militantly, weapons armed, ready for battle. But all of them, regardless of what they saw, would enter the pattern, would become part of it, would add their own threads to the eternal weaving. And I would bear witness. I would remember each ship's name, each crew member's face, each navigator's last thoughts before transformation claimed them. This was my purpose now, my function, my eternal duty. I was no longer Celestine Novastra. I was no longer Navigator Primus of House Novastra. I was the navigator lost in the warp. A title, a role, a warning, and a lure simultaneously. But there was one last thing I needed to do, one final act before I surrendered completely to what I had become. I needed to send a message, not into the warp where it would be absorbed and transformed and used as bait, but into real space, directly. A pure transmission, unfiltered by the Immaterium, carried on radio waves and laser light, slow and primitive but uncorruptible. I gathered what remained of my will. Every fragment of consciousness that still remembered Terra, that still recalled what it meant to be human, that still cared about the fate of the Imperium. I pulled these fragments together, compressed them, focused them into a single point of intention. And I screamed, not with my voice, not even with my mind. I screamed with my existence itself. I poured everything I had been and everything I would never be into a single transmission. A pulse of pure information encoded in the most basic binary. This happened. Remember, beware. The transmission lasted a fraction of a second. but it contained everything, the full story of the eternal judgment, the exact coordinates of the pattern, though coordinates in the warp are meaningless, the names of every ship that had been consumed, the faces of every crew member, the final thoughts of every navigator, and my confession, my true, final confession. I sent it toward Terra, toward the Astronomicon, toward the God Emperor himself, if he was still capable of listening, and I prayed, with a faith I didn't know I still possessed, that someone would receive it, that someone would understand, that someone would learn from my mistakes. Then I released the last fragments of my will. I let go, I surrendered, and I became. I am the Navigator, lost in the warp. I am the story that navigators tell to frighten their apprentices. I am the warning that goes unheeded, and the lesson that is never learned. I am the pattern and the prisoner, the trap and the bait, the question and the answer. I am what happens when pride meets infinity. I am what becomes of those who believe they can master the immaterium rather than simply survive it. I am the evidence that consciousness, for all its beauty and complexity, is ultimately just another form of food for the warp, another resource to be consumed and transformed and repurposed. I am eternal. I am nothing. I am everywhere and nowhere. I am the voice you hear when you open your third eye too wide. I am the shape you glimpse at the edge of your perception. I am the doubt that creeps in during your longest voyages. I am the question that wakes you from your meditation. What if I am not navigating the warp? What if the warp is navigating me? I was Celestine Novastra, third eye of House Novastra, Navigator Primus, proud, skilled, doomed from the moment I first opened my warp eye and believed I could stare into the infinite without the infinite staring back. The warp does not take you all at once. It eats you thought by thought, decision by decision, pride by pride, and when it has consumed everything you were, it uses what remains to feed itself, to grow larger, to catch others. You are reading this because I sent it, because in my last moment of clarity, I chose to warn you. But even this warning is a trap. The act of reading my story, of understanding my fate, creates a connection between you and the pattern. A thin thread, barely perceptible. But it is there, and threads given time can be pulled. So I leave you with this. If you are a navigator, trust nothing. Not the Astronomicon, not your instruments, not your training, and especially not your pride. The moment you believe you understand the warp is the moment you have already been consumed by it. If you are not a navigator, pray for us. We walk paths you cannot imagine, see vistas that would shatter your mind, and carry burdens that would break your soul. We are the lighthouse keepers in an ocean of madness, and sometimes the lighthouse itself becomes part of the storm. I am the navigator lost in the warp. I am still navigating. I will always be navigating. And if you ever feel the pull toward a pattern you do not understand, toward a structure that seems to call your name, toward a mystery that promises answers, remember me. Remember us. Remember the eternal judgment and its crew of 10,000 souls who thought they were journeying toward Malfi, but were actually journeying toward transformation. Remember that the warp gives nothing freely, that every revelation has a price. That understanding is the coin with which we purchase our own damnation. The warp does not take you all at once. It eats you thought by thought, decision by decision, pride by pride. And when it has consumed everything you were, it uses what remains to feed itself, to grow larger, to catch others. You are reading this because I sent it, because in my last moment of clarity I chose to warn you. But even this warning is a trap. The act of reading my story, of understanding my fate, creates a connection between you and the pattern. A thin thread, barely perceptible. But it is there, and threads, given time, can be pulled. So I leave you with this. If you are a navigator, trust nothing. Not the Astronomicon, not your instruments, not your training, and especially not your pride. The moment you believe you understand the warp is the moment you have already been consumed by it. If you are not a navigator, pray for us. We walk paths you cannot imagine, see vistas that would shatter your mind, and carry burdens that would break your soul. We are the lighthouse keepers in an ocean of madness, and sometimes the lighthouse itself becomes part of the storm. I am the navigator lost in the warp. I am still navigating. I will always be navigating. And if you ever feel the pull toward a pattern you do not understand, toward a structure that seems to call your name, toward a mystery that promises answers. Remember me. Remember us. Remember the eternal judgment and its crew of 10,000 souls who thought they were journeying toward Malfi, but were actually journeying toward transformation. Remember that the warp gives nothing freely, that every revelation has a price, that understanding is the coin with which we purchase our own damnation. The warp does not take you all at once. It eats you thought by thought. And when it's done, it uses what's left to catch the next victim. I should know. I am the bait. I am the warning. I am the story you will tell to others, never realizing that in telling it, you strengthen the pattern that consumed me. The Emperor protects, they say, but the Emperor is far away, and the warp is very, very close. Navigate carefully, my friends, or become like me, lost forever. Transmission ends. Source unknown. Authenticity unverifiable. Threat level maximal. By order of the Holy Ordos, this document is hereby classified Omega Umbra. Unauthorized access punishable by immediate mind wipe and servitor conversion. May the Emperor have mercy on those who read this and understand.